What is up, YouTube? Today we're looking at another user requested sound, and today we're going with the Ritmo sound, as can be heard in this track. So you may or may not know that sound. The sound in question is the TB303 sound, made famous by the legendary Roland TB303 bassline synthesizer, but it didn't really make too much bass sounds. I think that was their sort of idea when they created it, that when heavily distorted created that sort of acid sound that we know so well from the sort of early Goa and really early Psytrance tracks that the guys were making. So there's various ways of doing this. I mean, you can either get something like Audio Realism ABL3, the plugin that's kind of like the emulation of the TB303. For those who have been following along, you probably do have Serum already. And what I'm going to do is show you how to make a very similar sound using Serum. So for those purists out there, I know it's not going to sound exactly like a TB303. There's a reason that those are so sought after. I'm going to just sort of attempt to make a sound that does sound similar to what Ritmo was using. So let's dive in and have a look. So I'm just going to add an instance of Serum over here, just so I've got an init version. And what I'll do is just drag this MIDI that I've created earlier over. I'm going to show you guys what the MIDI pattern looks like. So it's pretty pertinent that you apply this velocity changes. That creates the different accents in the filter and the resonance and stuff in the sound that he was using. So definitely go ahead, you can pause now and copy this over. And then what you want to do is you want to transpose your MIDI track by +3, because I believe this track was in D sharp minor. So now what we want to do is we want to start looking at creating our TB303 emulation type of sound. And the basis is a very sharp decay on a filter with a very high resonance. Let's just set this filter maybe 18, probably going to sound a little bit more accurate. With a very high resonance and some distortion on it. So what we want to do is we want to first start by creating our envelope for the filter. So the idea is, like I was saying, we want to create quite a sharp decay sound. So let's set it to like 340 milliseconds. And then we want to drag this over onto the cutoff over here. And if you hold Alt Shift and click, it'll change it over to unipolar mode. So with this envelope, I want to just sort of attenuate it maybe about, say, 20%. Then what we want to do is we actually want to drag this onto the resonance as well. We can actually turn this down and then turn also about 20% or so. We should have something that looks similar to this. And then what we want to do is we want to turn the drive and the fat up. So let's just hear what sort of what the sound sounds like that we've created so far. Cool. So what we want to do now is we want to set this mono and legato on, and then we want to turn the portamento up to about, I think, 160 milliseconds. And then we want to apply these velocity changes to some of the settings that we are going to be modulating. So first up, we want to apply velocity to the cutoff. Again, also about like 20%. And let's hear what the sound sounds like so far. Okay, it's very loud, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. Also, what I want to do is I want to just use this built-in Cubase EQ just to high pass it at about, say, 250 Hertz. Then I also want to use this low cut input. So that's going to help with the effects and stuff that I'm going to be adding just now. So let's hear how that changes the sound. So it's starting to sound where we want to go with it, but now what we want to do is we want to add some distortion. That's one of the sort of key aspects of the TB303 sound, is the soft clip distortion. So I'm just going to play it and then vary the settings just till we get a sort of the type of sound that we're looking for. With these types of sounds, I like to add an EQ just before the distortion, and I'll use this high shelf and just gain it up a little bit. That adds that little bit of extra bite onto the top end. Now, one of the things that made the TB303 so famous is the incredibly snappy envelopes and particularly the accent effect. So I'm not 100% sure how it's actually employed in the circuit, but I think with Serum we can use another envelope to create a very similar effect. And what we want to do is we want to zoom in and we want to create one that's about half the sort of speed of the original one, but also by using this curve over here we've got a little bit more control that way. And now what we want to do is we want to drag this onto the cutoff, but we only want to modulate it maybe about 5%. Okay, let's be a little bit more generous, say about 10%. And we also want to drag this onto the resonance, modulate this quite a bit more than the cutoff though, let's say about 15, 20%. And you can also use this envelope 3 to modulate this drive on the distortion. That's quite a nice effect. That gives it more of a sort of plucky type of sound. I think we've gone a little bit high on the resonance and the filter, so let's just turn these down a little bit. So now that we've got the sort of bass sound down, we can start creating some variations and sort of start trying to get it closer to the sound that Ritmo is using as opposed to the sound of the TB303 itself. What we want to maybe do is let's add a second oscillator. I just want to use the sub for now just because we don't really need all the settings of oscillator Bs. And let's just turn the level down a bit and we want to turn it on here on the filter. And let's just hear how this has changed. I've also set this over to a square because the TB303 does actually have, I believe, a saw or a square oscillator that you can kind of mix between. What I want to do is I want to add a second filter. We can use this one to kind of sweep up and down like Ritmo did in the track. So I also want to create a bit of accent on this one. So using envelope 3, let's just drag it onto cutoff, Alt-Shift-Click, turn it down to about maybe 10% or so, and then let's turn this cutoff to about there. Let's add some to the resonance as well, maybe about like 25%. Let's add some to the drive, just for that extra punch, and let's just turn the fat up. We don't have to add the envelope to that. Now what we can do is we can set up a macro to control the modulation of both the cutoffs at the same time. So let's just drag this macro number 1 over onto both the cutoffs of both filters. And then we want to sort of listen to, I'm just going to rename it here. Filter. And then let's listen to the sort of range at which the sort of filter is employed to the modulation here. So let's just have a listen. Okay, that's a bit much, so let's just turn it down on here. Let's say the starting hertz down, and then yeah, that should be something like that. Should be cool. Cool, that's sounding closer to what we want. So now, another key element of the TB303 synthesizer is the limiter built in. So I'm just going to use Cubase's brick wall limiter, because unfortunately Serum, I believe, doesn't have one built in. So let's just use it like this. Let's hear the difference that it makes to the sound. So the idea is you want to tweak the threshold so that in the sort of lower cutoff areas, it's just catching the peaks. And when you turn the cutoff up higher, it doesn't let the sound get much higher than a certain point. And so that way you're able to create these sort of sweeping leads that aren't too dynamic. And that's the kind of sort of one of the key features of the 303 sound. And also I think we need to high pass this a bit more, just because there's a lot of mids and lows coming through in the sound. Cool, so now what we want to do is let's add a delay and reverb. So we can actually just use the built-in Cubase stuff. So let's use a 1/8D, set the low up quite high, turn the mix down. So now I'm noticing some of the sort of envelopes are a little bit too sharp. So what we can do is we can actually set a macro to control the sort of amount that the envelopes are applied to the specific parameters. So let's just go through that quickly. Let's look at envelope 3 over here. So everything that says envelope 3 in this block over here, we just want to set it to macro 2. And then this macro will control the amount of envelope 3 applied to all of the parameters that we set earlier. So we can call this one accent, similar to the accent control on the TB303. So it's not exact, but it's almost there, and with a little bit of tweaking, I'm sure you guys will be able to get a very similar sort of sound. So as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this and maybe a couple of variations to my Patreon for my Patreon $5 supporters. If you guys are keen to grab that sound, as well as a bunch of other sounds that I make in my videos, head on over to my Patreon and check out the different pledges I've got there. If you haven't yet, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.